Yeah, welcome to Bleeding Edge Web. It's late August, lots of people are on vacation, and it's super hot out. And so for those of you who made the trek out here in this heat, I really appreciate it. Jason will be up here in a few minutes to talk about Tauri, but this is our kind of normal Bleeding Edge Web update that we usually start off with. So first, a little housekeeping. We do have a Slack group, so if you're interested, join us there for discussion. And then, we're always looking for speakers, sponsors. Jason kindly reached out to me and volunteered to speak. We love it when people do that. So if you know someone or if you have a topic, we also do lightning talks. So even like a 5-minute thing showing off a project is always appreciated. And yeah, thanks to our host, Expedia. Jonas, do you want to say anything, mention anything? Yeah, well, we appreciate the hosting as always. Expedia, I don't work here, but it seems to be a pretty great place to work. Everyone I talk to seems really happy. So if you're interested, come talk to some of the folks here. All right, some library and framework news. Highlighting a few notable releases. Obviously, there's tons of stuff every month that gets released, but I wanted to call out a few that were kind of interesting to me. Tauri, obviously, the subject of our main talk, they have a major release candidate. I don't know if it's been updated since August 1st or not, but that was the last one I saw. jQuery UI is a very minor release, but I always like to highlight the jQuery releases because they're still kicking along after, 18 years or whatever it's been at this point. So it's kind of cool to see them still chugging along. Cheerio is one that's interesting. It's one that you may not have heard of, but it caught my eye because it's a Node library for basically, it's actually similar to jQuery, but in Node where you can do DOM querying and stuff. It's a library for that. It caught my eye because it hit 1.0 on August 7th. I have not personally used Node as my primary language since 2016, but back when I was using it, I was using Cheerio, and it was like a release candidate version. So here we are, 7 or 8 years later, and they actually kind of point that out themselves that they were in release candidate for like 7 years. And so they finally hit 1.0. So I just thought that was kind of funny. And then React Native is similar, actually. React Native has been around since 2015, I think, so 9 years, and they're still not even at 1.0, although they are claiming that they're very close now to finally being stable after 9 years. So that's pretty long haul there. And then Chroma is just a useful little JavaScript color management library. So if you have a need for that, they just had a major release. And baseline news. So this year we've been talking a lot about baseline, which is basically the feature set that all of our evergreen browsers support. So even though different browsers come out with different things behind flags all the time, once features hit baseline, that's when they're really interesting because that's when we can confidently start using those things in our development. We have had a few browser releases. So Firefox and Chrome are generally on kind of a monthly cadence. But as you probably know, Safari is a lot less regular than those guys, but they just had a release. I think this is probably their last release prior to 18, which is coming out sometime this fall. So with those releases, we did have a few minor things that went baseline. One of them is this thing called Flexbox Safe Alignment. So basically, it's kind of a, niche type of thing. But if you do use Flex, display Flex for doing layout, it's something that might end up biting you potentially. And it's best explained just by kind of showing you what it is. And so the use case is basically this. So we have a Flex container with some content. And if it's possible that the Flex container can clip the content, by default, you can see that there's no way to scroll to the left for that word, kind of small. So this word basically gets cut off, and it kind of hurts the accessibility of the content. And so if you have the potential for that happening and you add this safe attribute, then if it gets clipped, you can see it actually pushes the content to the right, but keeps it accessible via overflow like that. So it's kind of a, pretty specific use case, but if it is one that applies to what you're doing, it's good to be aware of. that went baseline with Safari. And then with Firefox 129, we have this new CSS thing called starting style. And again, this is kind of a specific use case, but if you have the need to start something, say off screen where it's not visible, and you want to transition it to being visible on screen through animation, when it's starting from display none, it's kind of tricky because when it's display none in the browser, it actually doesn't have styles from a browser standpoint. So now you can declare the starting style, which isn't used visually, but it is used to inform the browser of like what it should start from when it's transitioning. So it's helpful for that use case. And then this kind of goes with that a little bit, this allow discrete. So there are some properties that are called discrete properties, meaning they don't have properties that can easily be transitioned in a smooth way. So display and visibility are two examples of kind of binary things. You know, display can either be none or block or something. Visibility is visible or hidden. This new property allows you to actually say that during a transition, it'll automatically toggle that property at the 50% point of the transition. So it actually makes it work correctly with the transition. And when you put those together, a really good use case is something like a dialogue or any kind of, you know, modal type window or anything that's going to sort of appear from off screen and, you know, animate some position. This is kind of a bonus slide as well, because this also, if you have a keen eye, you'll notice that this starting style part of the CSS is actually nested inside of the dialogue style. And that's pure CSS. So if you're not familiar with this, it's actually a relatively new property called CSS nesting that actually went baseline back in December of last year. Previously, you couldn't nest things like this in CSS. You'd have to use Sass or Less or some other kind of preprocessor. So that's kind of just a bonus thing. If you missed that when it came out, that's another baseline feature in CSS. Cool. So some industry news. This is relevant because in our meetup last month, we actually highlighted this Google Privacy Sandbox thing. So the long story short is that several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago at this point, Google basically announced that they were going to go along with the rest of the industry at this point and basically deprecate third-party cookies. They have lots of problems around privacy and security. That was 3 or 4 years ago. Just last month, they kind of did an about face and announced, like, just kidding, we're actually still going to continue supporting third-party cookies. Now we have this new strategy called Privacy Sandbox, which is basically their way to try to have their cake and eat it too, as far as keeping their advertisers happy. The W3C was not amused by that. So they actually updated their technology architecture group recommendation very firmly and publicly, denouncing third-party cookies and, again, talking about all the reasons why they're terrible. And actually, the thing that was really bad is that they've apparently been working really closely with Google over the years on all these efforts. And they basically claim that this announcement came out of the blue. So, you know, it's Google being Google a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if, you know, they can be pressured to go back to the previous stance, but we'll see how that goes. It is something to keep an eye on, you know, if you are in that world at all, or if you deal with web-based advertising and keys and stuff like that, something good to keep an eye on. This is some big news. It's Europe-based news, so not directly affecting us yet. Although if your company happens to do AI and happens to, you know, do business in Europe, it could actually affect you. So again, good to be aware of. But they recently, just beginning of August, came out with the first truly comprehensive AI legislation in the world. So it basically defines different risk levels from 0 or minimal risk all the way up through unacceptable risk. So, you know, minimal risk would be something along the lines of a spam filter that uses AI to do that, where it's really no risk outside of that very limited case, all the way up to high and unacceptable risk, which would be like, you know, military applications and facial recognition that could affect people publicly and stuff like that. The unacceptable side of it is things that, you know, like, you know, affect children and stuff like that. That's kind of a no-no. So they define those levels, and then they define the levels of disclosure and mitigation that you have to enact if you're going to provide products that, you know, that are in those different risk levels. The unacceptable risk level is completely banned, so they actually, you know, enunciate a category of things that are completely unacceptable and not going to be legal. And then again, FYI, if this does affect you, even though the law came into force on August 1st, the actual enforcement is kind of phased in over the next few years. So there's some time to adapt to it. But if you're in the world of AI, definitely good to check that out. And then licensing. So this one is another one that touches on a topic we highlighted a few months back when we were talking about Redis and their licensing changes. They kind of went away from their open source license. And so this is an interesting one because there's always this tension with licensing, especially in open source, between true open source and a lot of times commercial companies that want to play in open source, but also want to protect their IP in some way. And so typically what happens is companies try to do these first two. So they want to make their source available and make it public. They even will typically make it, where it allows modification, some level of distribution. But the catch is that second line with minimal restrictions that protect the producer's business model. And so usually what that means, if you look at a lot of the licenses like LGPL and other ones that are sort of based on permissive licenses, but then they have these exceptions that make them restricted in some way. And so anytime you see a license like that from a commercial business standpoint, that's basically a no-no. You want to run away from it. And so Sentry initially put out a different license that basically was kind of like this. And again, their intention was to make it truly free and open source, but they got a lot of pushback. And so they kind of went back and huddled and then came back with this fair source licensing. The key thing that it adds is this third point. So delayed open source publication is a thing that actually kind of provides a nice middle ground where the initial release of software can still provide some IP protection. But then after some period of time, there's a guarantee in the license that that code will revert to free, permissively open source. So that kind of protects companies from, if say Sentry ends up going out of business, you're not stuck with code that's, poisoning your code base essentially. So it gives people an out. So again, good to know about, especially if you deal with open source at all. Licensing in open source is a huge jumbled mess sometimes. But it's interesting to see a new option there. Stack Overflow does an annual survey. That one just came out recently. 65,000 developers responded. And I just picked out a few interesting things. So who has a guess for the most popular language? According to 65,000 developers. Anyone? Python? That's not it. JavaScript. Yeah. So JavaScript is the most popular language, which I think it has been actually for most of the years of the survey. Here's a little harder one. So the most admired language is basically defined as a language that I don't currently use today, but that I've heard great things about and I'm really interested in using. That's what admired. So who has a guess? Rust. Good guess. Oh, whoever said it. And we're going to hear a little more about Rust, I think, in the next talk, a little bit. And then which language, people working in this language have the highest median salary in our industry? Any guesses? Scala? Maybe close, kind of in the ballpark. Erlang. Yeah, which I don't know much about personally, but I don't know. Anyway, so that's just a small taste. We've all seen these types of surveys, but it actually is a pretty good one. Lots of interesting insights into our industry. All right, a couple of events to point out. So React Conf actually is already over, so you missed it. But I'm highlighting it because the talks just recently went online. So if you're a React dev, there's some really good content there. You should go check it out. It's all online and free. ViteConf is coming up, and this one I'm highly recommending because even if you're not specifically using Vue or Vite or whatever, their conference, they bill it as innovating in the Vite ecosystem, but it has speakers like Rich Harris, who is the Svelte guy, and it has people from Remix and other frameworks as well. So I mean, it seems to be like a who's who of the really impactful frameworks that people are talking about right now. One really interesting thing to me is that I went to the site and I said, oh, this list of speakers, let's check it out. And I started scrolling. I did not find myself. But if you look at this list, it's a ton of people. And it's a one-day conference. And then that's when I realized that it says it is a 24-hour marathon of talks. Beat. Oh yeah, Tauri, yeah. So that's interesting. So I don't recommend that you sit down and just watch it straight through, but you know, it's all going to be online. It's all free. Like I said, the speaker list actually looks quite good. So the content looks very good. I signed up for it. I plan on checking it out. I recommend that you do too. So a couple of handy tools that I've run across just to highlight. This is a common thing that we deal with as developers, dealing with creating HTML email templates. There are lots of tools for that. I've actually done quite a bit of email development myself, and it's usually pretty painful. Like if you've dealt with email, there's just a lot of stuff to think about, a lot of technical details to worry about. This is a really cool tool. So you can install and run it locally. It's totally open source. It's totally free. It's built on the email best practices that you would have to spend hours Googling, because I've actually done it. Years ago, I spent hours and hours trying to figure out all the little hacks to make it work in Outlook, 2000 or whatever, all the old clients. It's a real pain in the butt. So this thing basically has all that built in, which is nice. And you can try it online. You can send yourself a test email. You can play around with the tool. But again, the fact that you can download it and run it locally is really cool, and it's totally free. So if you deal with email, check that one out. And then this one, svg.wtf. So again, this is kind of a specific thing, but if you deal with SVG, or actually if you're interested in learning SVG, this is a really good tool, because if you've ever kind of messed with SVG even a little bit, you know that the underlying format of the data can get pretty tricky depending on, if you have complex polygons and things like that. So the cool thing about this tool is you can sort of design something visually like this, and then you can just copy the code, paste it into your page, and you've got your SVG right there. And you can actually edit this stuff using the WYSIWYG tooling. So again, nice, cool little free resource online that you can play with. And then I always like to end with something a little bit interesting or fun. So I ran across this thing, WinFS. This turns any Google Calendar into a Fuse file system. So if you're not familiar with Fuse, it's basically a Unix thing for creating user space, like virtual file systems that you can mount onto a physical system. So it's kind of a specification. This isn't directly that, but it's sort of a take on that as a pattern. And so the concept is you can take a file like, say, this image, and it gets stored like that. And that's an image from Google Calendar of a bunch of events, and each event is a discrete chunk of the data of that image broken out across the event descriptions. And then the API knows how to store that and knows how to read from it and recompose those events back into that image. Why would someone do that, you ask? There is no good reason. And the guy basically, talks about how it's just an experiment that's for fun. But it is actually code on GitHub that you can go play with if you're so inclined or, masochistic. You spend your time doing that. So anyway, that was a fun one. That's my talk. Thanks. And Jason, come on up.
I got a few crossovers there, like Tauri, REST, based on. I need to share my stuff again. It's already up there. How do I? Is that it? Is that it? Boom. Yeah, let me see if I can get. Allow accessory to connect. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about Tauri. And how many people have used Tauri? How many people have used Electron? Okay, up here. So Tauri is a cool toolkit for cross-platform development. And you can target all the major desktop platforms, Mac and iOS. Version 1 came out about 2 years ago, so it's very new. And version 2 is that release candidate 6. So probably we're going to have general availability. I don't know exactly, but probably I would say, so right there. There's 2 reasons. Oh, okay. I'm walking away from the mic. There's 2 reasons people use Tauri. One of them is because you have a great web app, maybe the Expedia website right there, and you want to turn it into a desktop app. You've already got your web app. You put all that work into a web front end, a UI, and you just want to make a desktop app or a mobile app out of it. Another reason is just have a great idea. So this is great if you already are a developer and you know any JavaScript front end, jQuery, or you just want to code it in JavaScript or TypeScript yourself, Vue, Angular, React, whatever. And you want to create desktop and mobile apps from it. So there's already a way to do this for the desktop, right? That's Electron. And, with Electron, you can take your user interface written in JavaScript or TypeScript, and it's bundled up with Node and other things into a desktop app. And you're ready to go. So Electron version 1 was released about 8 years ago. So it's very mature, I would say, as framework go. And probably every day use one of these apps, desktop apps. They're all written with Electron. How many people use Visual Studio Code? Every desktop, Windows, Mac, Discord, Slack. Right? I use it all the time. It's solid. I can't think of when one of the desktop apps ever failed. So if you're making a decision, running around the conference, what are we going to use? We got this web front end. We want to make a desktop app. Electron's easy, right? Because it's proven. Know it. We have to contend with that. So right now, I'm going to make a case for why Tauri is a good alternative to Electron. So there are a bunch of Tauri. Actually, these might have been ported to Tauri too by now. But there's a lot of Tauri apps out there. That one, Fig.io, it's a command line helper. It's very nice. Acquired by Amazon. Space Drive, that's kind of cool. Let's get a singular view of many of the places we have files stored, like S3 and Dropbox, local files. Git Butler is a very cool Git client made by one of the founders. These are nice apps, thousands of users. But they're solid, they work. So one reason that you might want to look at Tauri is that I just did this, the latest version of Electron, version 32. I just, downloaded it and created the Hello World app. So it's 240 megabytes. And it just displays some stuff. Hello World on my Mac. And if you look, I downloaded the Discord and Slack desktop apps. Just take a look how big they are. And they're all between 400 and 500 megabytes. Huge. way, way bigger than they would wrote them natively for the desktop. Tauri Hello World app does basically the same thing, and it's 10 megabytes. So it's much, much smaller footprint. So initially, Tauri app is 20 times smaller. That's not going to be here, but it's you're starting off 20 times. And you can look around. There's different people say different things about performance and memory usage. But that's where we are. So this is one thing to consider. Now, why is it 20 times smaller? Well, let's define terminology. One word, a web. So web view is kind of like the guts of your web browser. It's like the core of your web browser. Something, and you can use, if you've ever created an app and wanted to include web capability, web stuff of a web browser, you can include web view component in your app. So I've created some. These are not super technical diagrams. Wanted to give you an idea of the difference. So your Electron app is your JavaScript UI and then Chromium web view component. Render code, and then Node.js is in there. So that's why the Electron app is pretty big. Got Chromium and Node.js bundled in the app, along with all of your UI stuff. Node.js handles facing your desktop apps running on Mac or Windows. So that's like 140 megabytes of stuff that's always included in every Electron app. So Tauri takes a different approach, and it uses the web component that's already in the operating system. So every modern operating system, well, there are probably some Linux that don't have it by default. The ones we know, common one, all include a web view component. So your iPhone has one, your Android phone has one, Mac, Windows have one, probably Red Hat by default have a web component. And so Tauri uses that. So it doesn't have to bundle Chromium, which is a web. The other part is that instead of Node.js, we've got DAO and Rai, which are web management, window management components written in Rust. They're pretty small. Rust files small. And there's all the other Rust binaries that are included back property, depending on what features your app. So typically it's, these compiled Rust binaries and your JavaScript UI, not very large. And you can look at a lot of the apps that have been created for it, not particularly large. So just for reference, the built-in web view that comes with various operating systems already there. But there is an advantage to including Chromium in the Electron app. And that's consistency, right? If you're a web developer, you know Chromium's in there. So you write, your UI code is pretty much going to run the same on every platform. Mac, Windows, Linux. If there's problems between Safari, for example, Safari and between Safari and Firefox, for example, right? Then that might come up in your Tauri app when it's run on Mac versus when it's run on, well, I'm thinking more Edge. If there's difference between running it on Edge browser on Windows, Safari on Mac, that could come up in your Tauri app running Windows, Tauri app running Windows, Tauri app running Mac. So, that's pretty common, right? Web dev world. Just remember IE6, right? Forever. It's really bizarre, very different. Nowadays, they're small. I had one come up on my Tauri app, Mac, gutters. So you have a window that sometimes have a scroll bar and sometimes doesn't. And a lot of content scroll bar. The scroll bar, I think Safari does not, allocate space for the scroll bar. So when the scroll bar disappears, everything shifts over slightly. I think on Firefox it doesn't. So you've got to go to like a third-party solution, like always scroll bar no matter what, or something. Okay. There's something you have to deal with. There's a little stuff like that might be a little extra work. You have a very complicated app, very cutting edge, might more work. But typically, I don't think it is. Typically, I think won't have a problem. And it's easy enough to solve. Anybody who's done web stuff. This is web front end stuff with back. But that is a way that Electron's a little bit. So the security model, as far as I can tell, Electron has no default security. Like out of the box, any UI code you put in it, do anything. It can access any file system, parts of the file system that Node can access, can do anything that Node can do. There is a way to gauge security on Electron. But by default, as far as I can tell, there's nothing. Tauri is super strict, and out of the box, can't do anything. Your app is completely can't access files, REST web service calls, and then I'll show you. You can just add the ability exactly. So I think that's something, if you're running it around the conference room, depending on what your company does, Tauri looks a little better. And of course, there's just the fact that Electron only targets Mac, Windows, and Linux. And Tauri targets Mac and iOS. So the case for Tauri versus Electron is, at least at the beginning, it's 20 times smaller. You can deploy to both desktop and mobile. And there's a very serious privilege. So now you've decided to use Tauri, right? now you decided to use Tauri. So how would we start? Well, it's kind of like creating any kind of front end app. You have the create Tauri app, it will --RC flag. And then it gives you a little flow. This is like a little, terminal flow, right? On your terminal. You give it a project name. It asks you if you want front end language types of JavaScript, Rust choices for your front end. Anybody use the Rust front end? There's a couple front end Rust. I've never. Seems like a strange language for front end. You choose a package manager. I think your favorite package manager. And then this is just, it's just going to set things up for you, make it easy to start, right? So your choice, you can start from whatever vanilla JavaScript you want to create. That would include things like jQuery or any other thing not here, or Vue, Svelte, React, Solid, Angular, or Preact. Right? Those are the ones that will set up for you initially. And then once you've chosen one of those, you want it set up for TypeScript or Java. Of course, you can always mix and match TypeScript and JavaScript. And then you're done. And it's set up the project, you're ready to go. This might be a great way, suppose you've already written your React app, you have your React front end, rather, and create this new thing, and you'll see you can plug everything, stuff everything in there, and then file it, start to develop. Right? So on the left, this is what the file system would look like if you created a new React app. So npx create React app, call it my-app. We're creating a new React app. And that's what the file system will look like after you've done run that. So when we create our Tauri app and we selected React and JavaScript, it looks almost the same. All of those things on the left for your React app are the same on the right, same function. The different ones are the source-Tauri directory, which is your backend. Rust code is, configuration, backend, all in that source Tauri directory. This is one of the things I really like, that there's a very clear division. Your front end is all there up top, basically, but then all the back end is in source Tauri directory. We're using Vite, so we've got a little Vite big.js file. The only weird thing that Vite doesn't like your, if you've ever done a React app, anybody created a React app before, the index.html file is normally in the public directory, but Vite doesn't. So the content of the file is the same, but it's at the small thing. So really, you're ready to go. If you've got all your React code, you can stuff it in the source directory and the public directory. Might have some things at the top level, possibly. And your package.json file, and you can start working. And once you've added all of your front end code, you have to decide, depends on how your front end code, what your front end code does. Does it need to access local file system? Does it need to access the camera on your laptop? Does it make REST web service calls somewhere? So depending on the functionality that you need to add plugins for the back end. So there's all these plugins that have been written. In version 2 of Tauri, almost every bit of functionality for your mobile or desktop app is plugin. Plugin is a bit of tiled Rust. Plugins. That's an okay. I think you would say that API. And to use plugins, you don't need to know Rust. It's important because Rust is, it takes a while to learn Rust. So lots of plugins are already there. Or visual dialogue files, client calls, login tool. Typically, and apps can update in place. It's like normal. Updater works the way you'd expect Windows, Mac. And there are a lot. And you can write your own if you know Rust. So how would we use a plugin? So let's suppose we have an app. Our front-end app is like a drawing app, and you can draw some stuff and save it as a PNG file. So we want to save it. So we're going to need the dialog plugin and the file system plugin, because we're going to save it to the local file system, Mac. Yeah. So this is what we need on the back end. We need to specify the name and version of the plugin, our cargo.toml file, and then in the lib.rs, bootstrap back end, we add them there. So that lib.rs file, rs is the Rust file. You need to be able to do that. And then the other thing we have to do is, since we're in a least privileged system, we have to give them permission to do what we want them to do. So we want the file system plugin to be able to write file and to decide where in the local file system will allow it to write. So those $, parameters, are slightly different depending on the depending on whether you're on Windows, Mac, Linux. But they pretty much make sense. The download directory, the desktop, the document directory, and it's defined in the documentation what those mean on different platforms. And we put that there's a capabilities directory with JSON file or files that specify the permissions that you're giving various plugins. So it can only write to places that you write. And on the front end, we're going to add Tauri-apps plugin-dialog to our package.json file, right? And import save. And when this little bit of, so this is in a JavaScript file in your React app. And when this is executed, it's going to bring up the standard save dialog on whatever platform you're on. So on the Mac, it'll look like that, right? Standard save dialog. And then once you hit the save button, right, then you have to actually write the file. So the save dialog just gets you the path name, because you're going to choose the path and the name of the file. Hit the save button. So then we have to import the write file or whatever method. It's the write file method from file system plugin, and then we can write to that path, right? File path, and you're done. That's pretty easy. You know, I mean, it's kind of get used to that. What you need to do for the back end, missions, front end, plug it. And we really didn't need to know Rust. That's probably an okay. Getting a little crazy. So let's look at it. Let's create a really simple plugin real quick. So let's solve a problem. So this is a problem I came up with. So, you know, my app is doing a lot of REST API calls. So I want to know if the network. Now these are standard. This is standard JavaScript browser specification stuff. Works every testing offline, add an event list on and off. Anybody ever use these? Yeah, except so offline works. Problem knows when it's offline. Online has a bug, and I guess they won't fix it because of what you need to do to fix it. Does anybody know what the bug is? Not really a bug. And that is that if you're connected to the local access point, but the local access point is not connected to the internet, it's still going to say you're online. That's because your app says, hey, you're online and nothing. 5 now. So the online doesn't really, and we want to fix that. So I have a very exceedingly mediocre fix. So let's look at this little Rust app I wrote. Guys, see the pointer? Really? Let's see if the arrow work. Okay. Yeah, standard IO. We're including the standard IO library, the TCP stream library, you know, the ability to connect over TCP/IP. So this is a real app that you could compile in Rust. FN means function. Main is like, it's like Java main. Whoops. That's the problem with this. And the result of this little 4-line app is going to be a standard IO. It's either going to be an OK or an error. So mute means mutable. It just means that the variable stream is a variable and not a constant. Kind of the opposite of most other languages. Most other languages, you have to specify it's a constant and it's a variable by default. Here, it's a constant by default. You have to specify it as a variable. So we're going to say stream is going to be the result of connecting to that IP address on port 80. That IP address is Google search, one of their known IP addresses, and we'll use port 80 because we don't want to have to deal with the question mark at the end says it's kind of like did it work? So it's going to immediately return an error if it didn't work. But otherwise, we connect it, and then stream is going to be a handle to stream. And so we're going to write the number 1. We're going to write that number 1 to that stream. Did that work? If it fails, we're going to return an error. Otherwise, we're going to go to the next one. We're going to read the first 128 bytes that we get back to that array. Did that work? If it did not, we get return error. Otherwise, we return OK. That's it. That's a pretty good test of whether we're on. But there you go. So how would this look as, so that's what we're going to do. And how would this look as a Tauri plugin? So in our Rust configuration, or in our Tauri backend Rust file, lib.rs, we can add what's called that hash command, which is like a macro that they created, define a command in Rust. And we're going to call it check internet connectivity. And we're going to return either a yes or a no. And we're doing the same thing. We're going to connect. If it's connected, then we're going to write the number 1. And if that succeeds, then we're going to read the next 8 bytes. If that succeeds, we're going to return OK, true, or we're going to have an error somewhere. So that's our plugin. On the front end, they give us a nice way to invoke commands called invoke. We'd include Tauri apps. Well, actually, we don't even have to include that by default. And we can invoke that Rust plugin. So we normally do this with a listener, right? Put this in a listener. But now we can check to see if it's connected, and we're really going to get a better idea if we're really connected. Now, to write something really good, right, you probably check for DNS resolution. Is by a lot of things, little things, check really test function. But this gives you the idea. That wasn't too bad, right? A plugin. So what about mobile apps? You know, by default with Tauri 2, you know, you put your front end in, you can compile for iOS and Android, show up iPhone or Android simulator. Gonna mess web, right? Maybe if it you know, if you've designed it in a way that responds, reacts properly, right? Changes it might depends. But that is a question that I had, right? Can you just take this app that we wrote React Web, and will it work? How can we get it to work on mobile? So normally, you know, you might be in a situation, typical one, where it's like, oh, we got to use React Native, something else if we're going to target mobile. And for the web, use, you know, regular React Web. Another question is whether the apps accept your app. I think this is already gone, though. I think this is already, people have already done this, and you know, whether your app store app, whether the app you created is just a repackaged website or as designed for mobile functionality. I think we've already answered this right now with these guys. So I just found out about these guys yesterday, and it's a very, very nice journaling app. And they use Tauri 2, and they use React for the web on mobile and desktop, Linux, Windows, Mac, and iOS and Android. And you can go to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store and download it. Nice. And it seems like a real mobile app, because it is. But they use React Web, and they just tweak. So to me, this is the really important point about Tauri 2, is that you can start with a single code base and with only minor changes, target all platforms. I think it's a big deal. It's a lot of work I don't have to do. Right, dealing with mobile versus web. And if you look at the app, it's I would call it a medium difficulty app. It's a journaling app. So it's not a super sophisticated app. Not a lot of multi-element that. But still, it's proof that it can be done. It can be done well from a single code base. I'm hoping they'll write a tutorial on all the old gymnastics. The guy said they did everything in-house. They didn't use Material Design or Bootstrap or any kind of kits for the look and feel. They did that all themselves. And they used Tail. So definitely possible. Another neat thing about Tauri, I think that's an AI, that's an okay AI approach. I was thinking of those sidecar, the sidecar motorcycles I saw. You can include a binary in your app. So if you want to include Python or Python executable or Node, you can stuff it in for Tauri app. So you put it at directory for Tauri, like binary, and the Python file is called Python. Tauri will look at the tag there, suffix and determine the right platform. Binary is different. ARM. Intel, ARM, what other, I don't know. But you might have to have a different binary. And as far as I know, Node and Python have been done by people. So they want to typically some Python script inside your app script. So you'd include it in that backend configuration file, and then on the front end, they have a command and X and argue use Shell plugin. So that's just a fun little option that going to make your app larger. So Tauri RC6 came out today or yesterday. I said it's probably going to get general availability. And I have a little sample React app that I created. That's source. That's just ready. You just want to have something that will just compile and do something, not super sophisticated. Run it. It'll actually compile iOS. Definitely Mac, Windows, iOS, right? Tried. So that's there to play with, like. There are some other options, besides Tauri and Electric. There's Whales.io, Neutrino, C++, Rust. I looked at a bunch of the other alternatives. They don't look. They just don't look like they've gotten far. I don't know if it isn't there or what, but they just haven't moved along that far. Maybe there doesn't strap well. That's it. That's 40 minutes. Yeah. Trying to keep it down. So what do you think? You guys ready to hit it with Tauri? Ready to go for it? Question.
I'm not too familiar with like mobile development, mostly web development, desktop. But I've been diving into like PWAs. So how does Tauri compare to making a web app in a PWA? And then two, how does Tauri compare to using like a native framework? Like,
Question. Like how does Tauri compare to a PWA? You mean like the single page web app, right? Progressive.
you're gonna install certain things like the Starbucks app, something directly on your device, desktop or mobile. I just go into like the website and there's certain features and stuff. But yeah, I've been playing around with it and it seems like it's a little bit more performative. It's like I use like the Wikipedia and the Starbucks PWAs as opposed to like the actual Android app for ones because it's like the file size totally minuscule.
So let's talk to your one of your questions about using a native toolkit. So the obvious advantage of the native toolkit is probably every feature is available, right? Using a native, any feature that's there, anything, the movement gyrometer ability, anything that's on phone or laptop is available. And with Tauri, probably most of them will be available, but there's going to be some that aren't ready yet. So there's that. The ability to do very, very fine tooling of the user interface is going to be definitely possible in a native toolkit. I'm not sure where that edge is, where there's some difference there. I think do anything probably with Tauri and with web dev tools available. So, I think that's more of an administrative decision, right? If you only are going to target mobile, never desktop, for example, probably use some other toolkit, maybe like Ionic, like that. At this point in time, I would think. So it would be a question of what do your developers know and what you're trying to do, right? I think mostly if they're I don't really have a lot of personal experience with Swift or Kotlin, and those are things you have to learn language. So if you know them already, that might be the way to go. Don't know good at JavaScript, TypeScript, and you're not super afraid of Rust, and you go with Tauri. Does anybody have anything? I'm not sure I would. I have all of the dev experience progressive web apps also, I think, I think you'd have to look at whether a desktop version of progressive web app solves what you want. Right? Like what's a progressive web app out there that might want to make a desktop app out of? You have one in mind?
Of freelance work and basically using like React 3 Fiber and like big, because the file sizes are like huge because like 3D models. So I can like I can store some of that data on the files. So I had 5. Yeah, so I don't know. PWA seem to like, for my use case, which is kind of niche. Yeah. For using PWAs, just having basically like web apps that just take up a lot. They're like 3D models instead of using like images on its own. It's like doing it. So that's something I'm still kind of fine tuning now. But one of the big features of PWA is like using like certain local for it. So like offline that you check. So that's kind of the stuff I'm working now. But yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm still trying to figure out. There's like some libraries I can use that use like local.
One of the great things about Tauri is that you're no longer constrained by the browser security, right? So you can easily store anything you want, anything on anywhere on a local file system. The browser seriously constrains your ability to easily just open a file and read and write from the local file system. And with Tauri, you can, given the proper security permission, you can read and write files, local files. So you've got all of that storage easily available. You could also easily do, calls to and from S3, Amazon, for example, which you can do from a web browser, but it's a lot of hassle, a lot of stuff. So you have your ability to make a So if storage is the issue, here. That's one of the nice things that happens, right? Because you have to make if you have a JavaScript UI running in your web browser, you have to, you're so constrained in so many ways by the browser security model. And all of that just goes away in Tauri. Have the browser security. So suddenly, you my file system, you make API calls where you don't have to worry about other windows, what else is running. Any other questions? All right.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out. We can hang out for a few minutes and chat. And yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to come up and discuss. But thanks for coming out.